are out there. Okay, we're gonna start this meeting tonight. This is the Centerville City Planning Commission meeting. It's Wednesday, May 24th, 2023. We are excited to have Lorraine
Thank you.
join us for her first meeting tonight. We are obviously missing Kevin, and we are also missing Mason. But other than that, Matt's here, Sean's here, Tyler's
I
here.
thought we were supposed to be missing Kevin.
Well,
Is he tacking on for another 7 years?
no,
I mean,
I
Or
think,
70 times 7?
I think he's officially, yeah.
so.
I have asked Tyler if he could share a thought with us. And while he gives his thought, Lorraine, if you just want to maybe think of a brief introduction so we can know who you are.
Okay.
That's totally on the spot.
No problem.
So we'll give you time to think while Tyler shares his thoughts.
So I told Heidi my comments today were directed towards Kevin, so he's not here.
Oh, bummer.
But anyways, no, when I was assigned this, I knew that Kevin was going to be leaving, and he had served 2 terms. And so the first thought that came to my mind was, President Washington served 2 terms, and I just thought it'd be fun to go see what his farewell address was like. And
There you go.
so I just want to share one quick paragraph. So it says, in looking forward to the moment which is intended to terminate the career of my public life, my feelings do not permit me to suspend the deep acknowledgement of that debt of gratitude which I owe to my beloved country for the many honors it has conferred upon me, still more for the steadfast confidence with which it has supported me, and for the opportunities I have thence enjoyed of manifesting my inviolable attachment by services faithful and persevering, though in usefulness unequal to my zeal. If benefits have resulted to our country from these services, let it always be remembered to your praise, and as an instructive example in our annals, that under circumstances in which the passions agitated in every direction were liable to mislead, amidst appearances sometimes dubious, vicissitudes of fortune often discouraging, and situations in which not unfrequently want of success has countenanced the spirit of criticism, the constancy of your support was the essential prop of the efforts and the guarantee of the plans by which they were effected. Profoundly penetrated with this idea, I shall carry it with me to my grave as a strong incitement to unceasing vows that heaven may continue to the choicest tokens of its beneficence, that your union and brotherly affection may be perpetual, that the free constitution which is the work of your hands may be sacredly maintained, that its administration in every department may be stamped with wisdom and virtue, that, in fine, the happiness of the people of these states, under the auspices of liberty, may be made complete by so careful preservation and so prudent a use of this blessing as will acquire to them the glory of recommending it to the applause, the affection, and adoption of every nation which is yet a stranger to it. So I just kind of thought it was really fun to hear, our first president of our country, that literacy and, the oration, we just don't really hear that today. So hopefully that takes you back to, the foundation of our country. I really liked how he mentioned every department, may be stamped with wisdom and virtue. And, our department here, the Planning Commission, that's my thought, is that we just be stamped with wisdom and virtue as well. And, Kevin is left, but, there's been so many people that have gone before us to lay such a good foundation for local, state, and, federal, and even international government, that it's just an honor to serve with one of you. And I'm sure if Kevin were here, we could all give him a big, high five and hug for all the service that he's done. But I just leave that with you as the thought for tonight.
Thank you, Tyler. All right, Lorraine, would you like to just briefly introduce yourself to us?
Sure.
So we can meet
I'm Lorraine Patterson, and I have lived in Centerville for about 8 years. I'm originally from Southern California. I lived there, and then we moved from North Hollywood to little tiny Shelley, Idaho. So that was a huge change. Had a 10-acre farm. Huge change. And then we ended up moving to Twin Falls. Lived there for a while. I met my now husband long time ago, 40 some odd years ago, and had no idea that he would end up being my husband. I was married, had 4 kids, and we lived in we wanted something smaller than California because I went back to California. And so we moved to Layton because to me that was super small, you know, compared to Orange County then. And then when, after I got divorced and then married my husband, Brad Patterson, I said, I want smaller. I want small, I want homey, I want safe. And so we ended up buying a home here. So he's lived here 9 years and I've lived here 8 years. And I've done everything from sales and marketing, from medical companies, to, I worked at the school, the junior high, the last 2 years. So I've done everything kind of in between and served a lot. I've served in Southern California and a little bit in Layton. And I was really excited when Clark asked me to serve in this capacity. It felt right.
Sweet.
And I said, I would love to.
Great. Well, welcome. Welcome,
Thank
welcome.
you.
All right. Now I would like to move on to our Pledge of Allegiance. So if we would all stand. That. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. So tonight, all three of our agenda items are set for administrative decisions. And I thought since Lorraine's new, we have a couple new people, we haven't really had an opportunity to do training, and so I hope we can do that in the near future. But before we start, because they're all three administrative decisions on their final site plan or their final subdivision plat, I thought maybe Lisa could just remind us what it is the commission's role tonight is when it's administrative decision versus a legislative decision. So we're just going to give her a brief few minutes before we start.
Great, thank you. Yes, I think this is a great opportunity. For those that are new, we've been sort of throwing these terms around, but basically land use decisions are divided into two types of decisions, legislative decisions and administrative decisions. And basically what that means is the legislative decisions are those that set policy. And all legislative land use decisions are made by the city council. And so if they adopt a zoning code amendment, that's a legislative decision because they're setting policy. Or if they rezone property, you know, that's our zoning map or general plan amendments. Those are all legislative decisions. And in those legislative decisions, the Planning Commission gives a recommendation. And administrative decisions are actually decisions that implement that policy. So administrative decisions is really where the Planning Commission makes most of its decisions, which it would be conditional use permits, site plan approvals, subdivision plats. So the Planning Commission is looking at the ordinances and determining whether the application meets that ordinance. So the why we make this distinction and have these trainings is because there's a different standard of review of those decisions, meaning if anyone wants to challenge the decision, then we have to look at was it administrative or legislative, because there's a different standard of review that the courts will use to review to make sure that the decision was sustainable. So in a legislative decision-making framework, the courts give municipalities and city councils broad deference. They say, you know, it's up to each city council to decide these legislative decisions. Where in their city should these, you know, areas be zoned? What should the rules be? And so the standard of review is reasonably debatable, which is it reasonably debatable that, you know, the decision was based upon, you know, or furthers the general welfare. So as I've said, in Utah, we have not yet had a case overturning a city council's land use decision in rezoning property. So we always try to have some, you know, either we tie it back to the general plan or something like that, but obviously the courts give us broad discretion. But in an administrative realm, the standard of review is substantial evidence. So it's a very different standard of review. Substantial evidence meaning that there has to be sufficient evidence in the record supporting your decision. So you can't just make a decision and say, well, we're going to deny this conditional use permit because we don't like the looks of it. You know, administrative decisions, you're merely looking at the ordinances and seeing if the application meets the ordinances. If it meets the ordinances, it needs to be approved. If you are inclined to deny it, there has to be sufficient evidence in the record that you're pointing to that says, no, this is why we're denying this. It doesn't meet this clause of our code. Or it, you know, it doesn't meet this section of our ordinances. So there are different decisions, different standards of review, but I think that's very helpful to just understand. And then the last aspect of distinction is that in legislative decisions, you can take into consideration public comment and sometimes what we call public clamor, because it's a legislative decision. It's how do we want our city to look? But in an administrative decision, administrative decisions cannot be based solely upon public clamor. So if you've got a subdivision plat in front of you and the entire neighborhood is against it, this is what's really hard about being on the planning commission is your role is to look at the ordinances and see if that subdivision meets the ordinances, because if it meets the ordinances, we have to approve it, regardless of what the neighborhood thinks. Now, what the neighborhood can do is say, well, for the next time, we would like to amend our ordinances, or we would like to elect new elected officials that will amend the ordinances. But in terms of the administrative decision in front of you, you don't have that option to just base your decision on the fact that the entire neighborhood is against it, as an example. So, and in the most recent legislative action, the state legislature has taken away any administrative decisions regarding subdivision plats away from the city council. All city councils, because it was very difficult as a legislative body to understand that distinction on administrative decisions, and they often were wearing their legislative cap when reviewing subdivision plats. So they are now out of the decision-making process when it comes to subdivision plats. So, any questions?
On that, is there ever a case where you've got both, you know, an action before the planning commission or city council where it's legislative and administrative? And if so, do you call it just legislative since that's kind of the, you know, I guess the
card.
Yeah.
kind of the trump card, or is it some other hybrid term?
Yeah, that's a
that
good
we
question.
use?
Typically, if it was a hybrid, I suspect each decision would be reviewed on its own. But let's take one example where it gets a little gray, is our plan development overlay. And in a plan development overlay, we're looking at the rezone, but at the same time as the rezone, we're looking at the conceptual subdivision or a conceptual site plan. But the way our ordinances are drafted, what might seem like typically an administrative decision on the conceptual plan, it's roped into the PDO, and so therefore the entire thing, in my opinion, is a legislative decision. And that's why we've drafted our ordinances that way, is to let us, at the legislative level, pull that sort of administrative decision into that and rope it in so that we get to see what the project might look like and make that approval. But that's only in a plan development overlay, not a typical subdivision. Another hybrid might be where you have a development project, but then they want to do a development agreement. And now we're just talking about a contract, would that contract be roped in? And there is some, there was some litigation about whether, that development agreement actually made a legislative decision. So they've made it more clear that if you're going to do something in a development agreement that changes the zoning or makes some sort of legislative decision, you still have to follow all the procedures for a legislative decision. So I know those two examples didn't specifically answer your question, but I think if it was a hybrid where they were clearly, one was an administrative and one was legislative, we'd probably have standard of reviews for each one.
Yeah, thanks.
Gold star for asking a question, though.
Great, cool, thank you. I appreciate it. All right, now let's start officially for our number one agenda item is the final site plan approval for the Centerville Industrial Flex Development. And as I mentioned earlier, this is scheduled for an administrative decision. So first we get to hear from staff and then we're gonna hear from the applicant. So, do you get to present to us or?
You get to tell me whether I get to.
Please do. Please do.
Thank you, Chair Shagrood. As we discussed, this is an administrative decision. Just by way of backing up for those who have not been in the prior discussions, our site plan process is 2 steps. You come in conceptually to talk about what you'd like to do. We evaluate it and whether it's feasible or likely to meet our ordinances. We give them some guidance in that review, and we accept it. It's something that says, yeah, this isn't a promise that you meet everything in the code, but it looks like you're going to probably get there, so prepare your plans for final site plan. And that's where we actually do the approval work. We're going to now verify compliance with city ordinances. And so tonight is your final site plan. Now, to muddy the waters just a little bit, Commissioner Hoth had made a question of earlier tonight. You have 2 items scheduled. So you have a Centerville Flex development scheduled for a site plan review, and you have a Trinity or former Syro Steel scheduled for review. Yet they are really integrated projects. It used to consist of multiple properties. Those properties have been adjusted into 2 parcels. 2 parcels are not in a subdivision scenario. They're just meets and bounds descriptions. They've adjusted those. The Centerville Flex owners have secured a substantial amount of the property, around 16 acres. The Syro Steel is around 9 acres or so. That's the existing facility that you see in the green buildings when you drive the freeway. Because they historically have been one site operated by Syro Steel, there is a requirement of the code to look at the Syro Steel site, and it is a non-conforming use to our ordinances, which is interpreted in the street as a grandfathered use. So it can remain, but it has to upgrade certain aspects of the site as the site has expanded and increased in value, increased in putting more buildings on the entire site. And those other, we call those other nonconformities. So you have your use, you have your building, which is a structure, and you have these other nonconformities. Other nonconformities is landscaping, parking, screening, things that what the code says is relatively easy to fix and bring up to the current codes. And so that's what Trinity's doing. It's your second item. We're reviewing that to bring up the Trinity portion of the property, to talk about the parking, to talk about the landscaping and the screening needs, and bring that facility up to the current codes related to that matter. What you're seeing in your first item is the Centerville Flex. This is the larger piece of property. They're proposing 3 buildings on there. Now, they are developing that site in compliance with today's codes. There's not a nonconformity situation being addressed in particular for Centerville Flex site. This is new development that we will be looking at our architectural standards. So you'll see the exhibits in there. We'll be looking at the parking, the landscaping, the infrastructure to service the site, and bringing that in compliance, not bringing it up, ensuring compliance. So both of them are administrative. The one is upgrading certain elements, and the first one you're looking at is, does it comply entirely with our ordinance? The uses are a flex space. They're based on a warehousing computation for parking. Staff brings up the issue that depending, in our industrial very high zones, we have quite a long laundry list of uses. And right now, if you did a warehouse facility, it's a calculation of parking of X. If you came in and did an indoor recreation center, it would change the parking ratio and be something else. So we are basing this on the application submitted for flex warehousing space. So that's what the calculations are on. I just bring it up in the staff report to say, hey, sometimes we see this flex housing end up into other uses, so we're just acknowledging it. This is your count, and if you go a different direction, you might be amending your site to accommodate any needed additional parking and so forth. They're not anticipating it. But I just call it out because we face it regularly with
Is
industrial.
that the idea that, like, they may come in as a warehouse, but then all of a sudden they're a karate dojo that has like 400 cars coming in every day?
Yeah, yeah. And the applicant's aware of that. We brought it up multiple times in the discussion. They are, historically, they've represented that they've committed to developing flex office space, so they don't have a desire to move that type of direction. But out of licking many wounds when they come in for business licenses, I just bring it up so that everybody has it on the table. But it doesn't appear from their application that they're heading any other direction other than the flex space. So it's allowed. It's a permitted use in the zone. So then we calculate the parking based on it and look at the parking, and under that, they provide the sufficient stalls. We looked at the landscaping. It's on the west side of I-15, so there's a little bit different standard. It's only 10% of the site has to be landscaped. And inside of that, your parking area gets landscaped to a 5% valuation that counts towards your overall 10%. We bring up that there's not secondary water out here, so although we have landscaping standards, you're not required in Centerville to install turf. We encourage a drought-tolerant design. They've had a landscape architect go through, and a landscape architect has prepared a design that's taking in consideration of a bit of conservation of water and not planting turf in high water use plantings. So that looks to be in order. What's interesting as far as infrastructure serving this site, it does take connections for water and some storm drainage and sewer to some extent that will also use the Trinity site, particularly the water lines. In order to loop the water lines, create the fire flows that are necessary to serve all the buildings on both properties. They're developing infrastructure on their site. Some of that infrastructure does spill over to the Trinity site, as well as cross-access for circulation. Access and circulation will cross over to the Trinity site. So they are dependent on each other to make it successful. So you'll see in the staff reports in both of the projects that we're anticipating that crossover need, and also the access and the infrastructure need. And we're calling out that these are development phases. Even though they're two separate properties, they're dependent on each other to simultaneously begin developing together to create that infrastructure and those shared access. So although it's two properties, it is integrated one together. So you'll see our conditions that we're recommending approval, if you agree with them, that tie these two sites together, and they're interdependent because of that nature. One thing that some of you may not be aware yet, we have done some conceptual subdivision work on the Centerville Flex site. They received a conceptual acceptance for dividing the land. They will divide the buildings out for ownership. The rest of the parking and landscaping will be in common. They've indicated they're long-term holders of the property, but like you do in all kinds of investments, you look to the future. And so they are creating a subdivision further with the Trinity, not the Trinity site, the Centerville Flex site also, but that's running a little separate course. Since it's a PUD, it really has to follow the site plan process. So finishing up the site plan process will determine how the final subdivision plat actually occurs. And so that should work. Another unique thing that some of you might not be aware about is not all of the property is located in Centerville. There's a small portion in the southwest corner that sits in West Bountiful. West Bountiful, Centerville City, and the developer entered into a non-binding memorandum of understanding saying because this has crossed boundaries to the city, each city has an interest in the development. West Bountiful has, I don't know if this is the right word, acquiesced their site plan review to Centerville.
That's what I noticed, that any like plans have to come to the Centerville City,
Yep.
fees have to come to us, and is it them just not wanting to touch it?
No, it's the issue, it's a small enough piece that's kind of cornered back into, and it doesn't really have frontage access to public streets maintained and owned by West Bountiful City. Sits right behind their little small industrial development at the corner of that intersection, Porter and 1250 West. So there will be some type of interlocal agreement. How that shakes itself out is still to be seen. The discussion of services, infrastructure, administration of duties, now and into the future for building permits and charges of water and so forth. It's substantially dependent on Centerville, and so I think that'll be a discussion of West Bountiful is what is that fair share in that process. And fair share I used in a loose term because certainly Centerville and West Bountiful can negotiate what they think is in the best interest of both cities, not worrying about necessarily whether this is your correct pro rata cut to it or not. It's just kind of a joint effort, and West Bountiful's chosen to allow Centerville to use its zoning ordinances to govern this property because they felt that our zoning ordinances were probably a little better shape to address the project. And maybe that's me just tooting our zoning ordinance a little too strong. So that's very dependent upon that. We've had lots of interactions with the applicant. It's a complex project. Not all of us fundamentally disagree with every little micro element into the project. But as a whole, it's meeting our IVH standards, so you don't have to worry about that. It's really just a matter of timing and developing and financing the project that creates those discussions between the various cities. And then ultimately, how is West Bountiful participating in all of this? So the conditions are a little bit lengthy and a little bit heavy with expectations because we are having cross interconnections and we are dealing with property outside of the city. And so I put a contingent upon both sites to complete that process to ensure that it develops. If by chance West Bountiful, again, another great word, bails from it, I don't think they are, but if by chance they bail from it, that would create a reconfiguration for the building in the southwest area that's outside, and I think maybe part of the other building too. So we'd have to amend the site plan, so it would come back to the commission to amend it and reconfigure the layout. All my discussions that I've had with Bountiful West Bountiful city managers and Centerville city managers is we don't think it's in that type of mode to fail. But as a planner, you never know what happens tomorrow. So you lay out the conditions to try to address in case it happens. So we're recommending approval, even though it's a little bit heavy on outlining those parameters. So that would mean discuss the Centerville Flex, take action on it, discuss the Trinity, take action on it, but you don't need me to talk about Trinity because I already did.
Cool.
But I'll answer questions on both sides at any time you want.
Okay. Do you have questions for Corey, guys, at this moment before we hear from the applicant?
Not right now, no.
Okay, applicant, if you would like to come up, tell us your name. We've heard from you before, but there's new people, faces here, so give us your name and let us know what you have to say.
Yeah. So Sam Nelson, I'm with Stoke Stevenson, the developer. Appreciate Corey for giving that introduction. I really don't have anything else to add to that. We have been working a lot with Corey and Lisa as well, just to make sure all those conditions are met. And they've been great at answering all of our questions and helping us have a clear path forward. So as of right now, I don't have anything else to add. So.
Commission, do you have any questions for Sam? Oh, wow, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think last time you brought up
So
some
nice.
trees as
Yeah.
as the botanist here of the
Yeah,
group.
yeah, I looked at it.
So you're good on that?
Got that changed, right?
Yeah, yeah. it's
I
good.
saw a gladiator, some, other tree that wasn't on there before or something, so it looks like you're You're good on.
Yeah, and I think I had mentioned something about grasses, and they've taken out all their grass, and it's a very wise landscape. They, PKJ has done a good job. So, yeah. Are you ready to talk about it?
Yeah,
Okay.
let's chat.
What would you like to say, Sean?
I was just looking through the development standards for the industrial, very high, and in regards to conformity, one of the things was building height depicted as 36, our requirement's 35, it's a foot over. Are we concerned about that 1 foot? I see you, in the conformity, it says likely with an asterisk. What does likely mean?
Good question. Under our definition of building height, we go to the top of the floor area at 35 feet. And often you have parapets by design as well as by code. We want to screen the mechanical equipment from the street. And so you have elements like elevators and any towers, mechanical equipment. Under our supplementary development standards, when it talks about how height is measured, those are exempted from the height requirement. So if you look at it,
Including parapets?
yeah, the tower's going up. So you have this area of screening element, and so although I don't see it on the detail, it says 36 feet, but I call it out because if you go to the artificial ground to the top, it's 36 feet. But I'm assuming that there is a space of parapet. And so I think it likely meets it, but maybe the developer can answer whether that last foot is ceiling height interior, habitable space, the way we define it, or if it's sitting above that
If I
35.
recall, and I'm not sure if it was this particular project or another one, but they put this particular height because of the amount of stacks that you could stack for pallets. And it was something to do with that, but if they were like a foot under, it would be, I don't know, three levels only. Is that this particular one?
I think that was mentioned during the conceptual. I could be wrong, but I think that was mentioned.
And hence
But it was listed in the original plan, I think, at 38 feet. And so this one's dropped to 36, and I'm assuming
they've
that
taken into effect that.
they've taken that into
height.
effect. But that's why I said likely. And then there's a condition that's saying, okay, I maybe assume this, but you're conditioned at 35 feet according to our ordinances.
I mean, they're dimensioning 35 feet on the documents.
I looked at one plan that said 36, but I could have read it wrong.
I haven't found one yet, but
I think I held the plan too close to my face then. Didn't stick it back out far enough.
So that, there's like a metal shop, there's a couple of existing buildings on that, and then just to the south, there's what, like a car?
Yeah, there's a car repair facility
repair
and a rental
facility.
unit there, that's just inside, that's the row property.
So is that gonna, that operation, business, is that gonna?
No, it
It's gonna
stays.
stay?
It's gonna stay.
And then the existing metal shop buildings?
Metal
those
shop
will
areas
stay?
and their administration stay on the Trinity, yep.
Okay. And then the parking will just kind of go in between those two main portions?
Mine says 36.
there's stuff.
You have
Yeah.
a different one?
We have different versions apparently.
Mine says 36, his says
There's a
35.
version 1 and a version 2, doesn't it?
All right.
Cool. Try to hit that 35.
So
How
what's
about
the
that?
date on yours? This says March 30th.
I thought I only loaded one site plan.
This one's more up to date.
So they updated it and dropped it to 35.
Sweet.
That may be
No
where I
more
pulled my
concern.
36.
Weird. I just, it's on whatever's on the agenda. Okay, cool.
Great question.
Anyway,
Just-
that's off a parapet anyway, so the roof deck would be lower than that. So, not worry about it.
You worried about anything
No
else?
issue with parking?
Is that
There's enough parking spaces and lots there?
Says they've met it.
Except for the southern parking area, drive aisle is a width of 24 feet and it's supposed to be 26. Remember bringing that up?
20, I think it's 24 feet, it's supposed to be 25.
Yeah.
And then on the Trinity site, you see a one-way drive aisle. I don't think it was dimensioned. They're not really doing a one-way because you don't have angled parking, but it functions as a one-way. So I'm trying to call out the minimum aisle width, so they'll need to adjust slightly for that. And so there are a few minor corrections. You don't have to consider them minor corrections. It's entirely up to you. But I thought, well, these can be corrected.
Those
at
are
the
issues
building.
that'll be sorted out as part of the final approval.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what I put in there is if somehow the zoning administrator goes rogue or didn't have their Mountain Dew in the morning, they can come back to the planning commission to resolve that.
Nice. Did you put that in here?
In the conditions?
Yeah, doesn't have his Mountain Dew and goes
Oh,
rogue.
no, I didn't say go rogue and Mountain Dew.
Okay,
Did you want to make an amendment?
no.
Actually, Red Bull, not
Red Bull.
It sounds like there's no real concerns from the planning commission. I'm not sensing anyone. Does anyone want to make a motion for us?
I'm not really seeing or hearing anything new since we talked, I mean, some minor adjustments to the landscaping was the biggest thing.
Looked
right?
good to
So-
me.
I can make a motion. Hereby make a motion for the planning commission to approve the final site plan for the Centerville Industrial Flex development located generally at 1200 West, 50 South as follows. Numbers 1 and 2, 3A through H, 4 through 13 with suggested reasons for actions, A through C.
Second that motion?
Great, we have a motion and a second. Any further debate before we get to vote? Cool. We'll start with you, Sean.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
You want me to vote since
Yes,
it's,
you
since
get
I'm
to
new?
vote.
All right, so I vote aye, yes.
Okay. Yes, okay, great. So that motion passes. Good job. You can vote.
Okay, thank
Starting the end strong.
Okay. All right.
All right, so our next item is number 2, which is literally the same as we've mentioned before. It's the amended final site plan for the Trinity development. Again, it's an administrative decision. I'm just gonna ask, does anybody have any questions? Clarifications for this guy? Would you like to hear from the applicant again?
So Corey, if I understand right, this just has to do with the overall property, right? Request for final site plan amended approval. So this is less about the buildings, but more about the property.
Correct. The buildings and uses are not being evaluated because they have a right already established to be there. And so now we're just doing the site improvements, for lack of better terms.
So Trinity will still exist there?
Yes, it is, I think it's sold to a property called Voltaire, I think is the right name, but it still operates as or leases, or as a subsidy of, Trinity's a subsidy of their operation, so they're currently using it for warehousing. It's not in operation for galvanizing at this point, but they have a rail spur and they store a lot of their, they don't want to.
Okay. That sounds pretty straightforward.
All right, well, I guess we don't need to hear from you, applicant, again. So let's discuss it. If there's anyone that wants to discuss anything, or if we feel comfortable moving forward with this motion, I think staff has done a good job of outlining the reasons why we should approve it and its conditions. So
It says on page 70, the staff believes the proposed development is still consistent with redevelopment area and mitigating heavy industrial type uses if they were to occur.
Yep.
No disagreement.
Cool.
Do you have any concerns with the outside storage? I just saw that it was a to be determined rather than conforming.
Yes, what you kind of have is, as part of a site plan approval, you have to identify your outdoor storage areas. And there is a screening requirement to a public street view of a minimum chain link fence with slats up to 90% opaque view. What's unique about the Trinity site is they kind of have an existing operation, and they're improving the site on the perimeters, for lack of a better term, and a little bit deeper, so that they address those nonconformities. But there are some areas surrounding the buildings that is not really being improved. It's not being repaved, it's not being, and the question becomes, is they have used other areas of the site for product storage outside. They're now using it inside for the most part. And I'm just calling out, okay, I'm assuming in this review that it's all indoor storage. But if you plan to use that unimproved area kind of on the, surrounding the footprint of the buildings for storage also, it has to be screened.
Okay.
So that's really all I'm calling out, because it doesn't say explicitly whether or not they're gonna store stuff outside.
Right. Because it would rust because it's steel, right?
Until it's galvanized.
Okay, sorry, that's all.
No need to be sorry. Does anyone want to make a motion then?
I will make a motion. Let's see. I hereby make a motion for the planning commission to approve the amended final site plan for the proposed Trinity facility site located generally at 1200 West, 50 South as follows. And it's items 1 through 8.
Keep going.
Excuse me, 13, with suggested reasons for actions A through C.
Great, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I second it.
Thanks, Sean. All right, any last words? Okay, great. We'll start with you again, Sean.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye? Aye. Super duper. We have passed this one too. Lively crew today. All right, so those two passed. Thank you for coming. Very exciting meeting.
Chair Shagru, can I address the applicant?
Please, please.
We'll follow up with the approval letters, and then we'll continue the process that we've talked about online.
I look forward to seeing what goes there next. All good things.
I'll send my kids to the karate dojo.
Yeah.
The gymnastics tumbling extravaganza begins.
Or the trampoline park.
Laser tag.
Yes.
See ya.
All right, this is the third item on our agenda today. It's the final subdivision plat for the Canyon Point development. This is also an administrative decision. The petitioner is Chad Morris. We're scheduled administrator. I repeated myself. All right, first we get to hear from staff.
Thank you.
All right,
Get me again.
Corey's up.
And not batting 1,000. But anyhow, this is administrative, as you indicated. Just to recap, this is the Canyon Point development. It's located roughly 400 north. Some people carry it up to as Parish Lane, but on our maps it ends at Main Street. So it's 400 north, 400 east. You see some homes. You've seen a couple of torn down if you've driven by. And it's basically an infill sitting just on the south side of 400 north. It's a project that's been somewhat long in the making, just to jab the applicant a little bit since we've had tons of discussions. But they have gone through their conceptual site plan and their final site plan. So this is a multifamily zoned piece of property, but it has a mixture of single-family homes and a couple of duplexes. So it is zoned multifamily, but they have chosen to use the single-family as a part of the project, given the shape and adjoining uses of the property. They've laid out this infill private lane. So this is a private lane with the infill of the homes and the duplexes. They are maintaining one of the homes as part of their project. So it's done the conceptual review, it's done the site plan review. Under our ordinances, and this is really typical of multifamily development, you don't have to build necessarily public streets because you're not creating lots entering public streets. You usually create buildings and private drives and parking and everything a part of your complex. In this case, it looks like a public street because we do require the width of a normal public street. We just don't require the right-of-way, which has park strips and sidewalks necessarily when using a private lane. Because it's received its final site plan approval, it's under construction right now. They've bonded, they're currently moving towards developing the property, and they could just build all these buildings right now, and away they go. But they couldn't sell them. And so the method to sell them is to create a subdivision plat. And since they're not creating typical lots on a public street, they're using the PUD plat, or the planned unit development plat of our subdivision ordinance. And basically, the plat is required to meet our general plan expectations. Those were reviewed under site plan. And apply the development layout as per it was approved. And so that's essentially now allows them to come in, plat the different units in some fashion, record that plat, and put the individual units or buildings up for sale. That's what they're doing. So you'll see a private area for the units. That's what's being sold. You'll see the limited common area around the units. Limited common is for use by that, usually it's defined for use by the owner of the unit, but it still is ultimately in control of the whole project. Association still can define what's happening in that limited common. And you'll see limited common for driveway access, a little bit patios, a little bit of yard space. That's not uncommon to see that. And then you have the remaining area, the road and the open space and the recreation facilities in the two corners. So you got one behind Unit 11 is a garden and open space under the site plan approval. And then you have the southwest area, that's a dog park, closed dog park. And then on the northwest side, that space between 400 North and the duplex Unit 8 is the detention basin, the stormwater detention basin. So those will all be in public, not public, HOA ownership, common ownership. There was a discussion about in your subdivision of units 7 and 8, whether the limited common goes and extends back to the rear lot lines and not create the alleyway. This was the plan that was received to me, but I think you could still ask the applicant because he and I discussed maybe extending that back to the fence line of Granite Square. I don't know what the ensued discussions. We did find out the storm drain pipe from the dog park north is going in a pipe in that situation. And so, but this was the project that I downloaded from our application process. So I don't know if that's changed and I've got it right. So we can let Mr. Morris talk about that, but that was something the Planning Commission brought up. But other than that, this is final. So what you're doing tonight is making a recommendation, because currently, even though state laws changed for next year on subdivision, our current ordinance, the final plat is accepted by the city council. So you're just reviewing it to say, hey, does this meet our subdivision ordinance? Which then you're going back to your site plan approval and saying, is it implementing that site plan approval? Staff is saying yes. You're going to look at that, determine that yourself, whether you agree with that findings, and then you'll make a recommendation to city council, and then this will bump this particular application for now will bump up the city council for their final acceptance of the plat. So we're recommending approval.
Okay. Do you guys have any questions for Corey?
Just on here where it's noted, that likely you'll need the utility easement and the missing open space easement. Is that something that will be done, from tonight before they get to city council, or is that something that, how does that process work?
Yeah, that's where I didn't have, and I didn't have a chance to talk to the city engineer. We did site plan and they're installing improvements. I don't remember, we did a blanket easement for the installation of improvements, and then the plat will then, once the improvements go in, call out where that public utility easement's going to be. And so that's why I conditioned that. And so can it be done before it goes to the council? Yes. But also to be done as part of the in-between a council review and the recording of the plat to verify that the easements are correct. Because we do have water lines and stuff going through there.
That was my only question too. All right, Mr. Morris, let's hear from you. Coming up, state your name, even though I just stated it. Give us the skinny.
All right, Chad Morris with South Davis Home Rentals. Yeah, just addressing the lot 7 and 8, we have gone to our engineer. They extended it. I actually just emailed you that copy. I thought I did it a while ago, but I didn't, I guess. So you have that, but it has been up, and that's the only thing that's really changing with it.
So show me on that map how it changes.
Extended what? Yeah.
It extends the lot lines to the west
All the
property
way to
line.
the property line?
Yeah,
Because it
So-
was a drainage pipe running to the street.
correct.
And you just didn't want those properties to go on that.
Well,
Yeah,
it
and
doesn't run to the street, it runs to the detention facility.
correct.
It does run to the detention
It
facility.
runs to the detention facility, not, and then the detention facility
Runs to the
Overflows.
flows to the street, correct?
Yes.
It shows
Yes.
that here where it kind of goes into.
So that
basin
easement
there.
will still be there, notwithstanding the moving of those lines to the
So This is
west.
the overflow.
In case you need to go
Well-
access it, maintain it. you can-
Yes, and that's what I discussed with Corey and that, and I can't remember who else. It technically is the HOA property, it's not necessarily, I mean, I think there's an easement there anyway, but the pipe is not the city's. It's the HOAs that will manage that, so it's in the HOA documents where that is kind of taken care of in the sense of they need to allow
That'll be limited
maintenance.
commons, so they can use the surface,
Yeah.
but the HOA is in charge of the
So
property.
what it
Correct.
means though is if I own unit 7 or 8 and I wish to fence in my property, I fence in all the way to Granite Square, to the back, so that it doesn't, right? So that it
Correct.
doesn't create this alleyway where you're walking between two fences. It just becomes no man's land where no one can use it. So that's great.
Having
Right.
said that, there is a berm there that would make it tough to do that.
Exactly, it's gonna be a little tough anyway, because there is a berm that's required as well. I mean, but they can, it's just up to them it's up to them to do it, it's, yes,
Yep.
correct.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, and
Not
then,
impossible.
no, it's not too tough, but, and then, yes, there's kind of that easement all through the street for utilities. Yeah.
Super. I have a question for you. Have you reached out to UTA and it seemed like the neighbors were very concerned about that bus stop?
Do you know what? That is the one thing that I forgot to do. So I will make sure I get on that. So.
What do you mean?
So for Lorraine, she wasn't here for that. Last meeting, it was for a public open house or a public comment period. And one of the residents who owns the house, Connie Madison, on the corner there said, well, there's a bus stop right where the proposed Canyon Point Lane is going to enter and curb cut off of 400 East into this development. And so she was very concerned that the bus stop not be moved to her property to the north. And I don't think UTA would move it to the north because I think UTA has all these kinds of restrictions about how far from the corner the bus stop has to be, and I imagine it's there now, so they're not gonna move it to, they're probably gonna move it to the south. So they're probably gonna move it down near Unit 1.
That would be my guess.
But we had just recommended that maybe Chad reach out to UTA
Yeah.
and give him the heads up, but he will.
I will. I'll take it.
Okay.
So then just south of unit 11, that's the common area where you're gonna build what again there?
Correct. Oh,
I think you said there's gonna be the gardens there.
yeah. There's there are garden boxes there for the neighborhood. A pergola. I don't have the plat map in front of me. I want to say cover there for eating, whatnot, picnics,
Like a little
gatherings. Yeah.
And weren't you gonna put your mailbox bank there too? Where's your mailbox bank going?
I'm trying to remember where we have it. Let me pull up all the older
Exit
plat
UTA
maps.
probably. I confused that UTA
You mean on the
driver.
Madson's property?
The mail driver. the
Mail
UTA
driver
can
shows
find
up at the same time, start fisticuffs.
Oh dear.
Let's see.
Bless the postal service, but it seems to me they often put their bank of mailboxes in the most awkward spot for the flow of traffic.
You know, right?
You know, like the street, 650 North maybe is what it is, when you come down, it used to be Pioneer, and you come down and then it does all these curves, and they put it right on the
Right, the bank.
curve, right before you get to the corner, you know, and the church there, and it's just like, and people live in this development, bless them, they won't walk, so they drive and then they park there regardless if it's on the right side or the wrong side of the street of traffic, they just park right there and then they're parked on the other side and then you can't fit a car through and it's real fun. So,
Do you know, it's not pulling up here, let me,
and sometimes you
But-
don't get to choose, the postal service chooses.
they
for
do
you.
that most of the time, I think, right?
Okay.
But I
If you
think that's what we
plan
talked about,
for
is
it.
like hoping to recommend that.
Yeah, if you can plan for
'cause
it,
it's-
then it gets put in a better spot that then hopefully doesn't negatively impact your residents.
Yeah,
That's all.
yeah, we'll plan for that.
Do you provide the fencing around the dog park?
Yes, we're taking care of, we're the ones dealing with building the dog park.
That's nice to have that.
Yeah.
Is it gonna be grass or artificial
I
turf?
believe it's artificial turf, if I remember right. Let me pull up the landscaping
With like
plan
a
here.
giant cannon
Yeah,
watering
you-
system
you'd
to
label it
clean
artificial.
that.
That's what I thought, yeah.
You have to be able to clean it.
Can I bring my dog there? Or do I have to have like a
Do I have
code to
to?
get it?
Have a fob key.
You gotta,
Yeah,
you might be
buggy.
selling memberships.
It's true, like, I think for like $100 a month or something, you could do it.
Maybe I'll just buy an HOA there or something.
That's right. We'd rather that.
Cool. Any more questions? Thanks, Chad.
Hey, you're welcome. Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Alrighty, folks. Do you guys have any thoughts? Do you feel like you're leading towards, hey, we want to see those 2 yellow items? Or you're comfortable with those 2 yellow items coming in throughout the process?
As part of the final.
Yeah.
I am.
I am as well.
I feel like we've talked this one over many times and kind of sorted out what we were
Okay.
concerned about, so.
Yep.
That's my thought.
Okay.
Yep, I
You
agree.
too? Cool. Then I guess we should have a motion.
Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Do you want me to do it? Okay.
I do.
All right, I hereby make a
Keep looking at
motion, yep, for the planning commission to recommend approval of the final subdivision plan for Canyon Point in Centerville Development located at approximately 347 North, 400 East, subject to conditions 1 through 4 and suggested reasons for action A through C.
A second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any last moment for your final declaration is now? Great. Sean, we're going to just keep going with you
Let's just
first.
Start here. Aye.
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 Aye?
Sweet.
That
motion
works if you don't have a split vote.
passes.
That's true.
Thanks, Chad. Probably Corey's going to work with you on a few final yellow things.
We
Got to
get-
get those to green,
We get to go to the council.
and then you get to go to the council.
And if you add an E to the end of the point of your development, that'd even be really cool. What's it?
Because,
Just to be fancy.
Just to be fancy,
Yeah.
it's like adding like Centerpoint Theater, they throw an E at the end of theater.
R-E.
Yeah, R-E. Confuses me every time I Google that thing. Sorry, that's neither here nor there.
Oh, I have a question for you,
Just a
Sean.
helpful tip.
You live here
Yeah, I do.
in your company? Is it? I'm gonna go-
Shady? No.
Well, I wasn't gonna ask that yet, but I might in a few minutes. No, I mean, is it based here in Centerville or Davis County?
There's a few partners, 2 of us are in Centerville, 2 in Farmington.
That's good.
Or 4 partners, I should say.
He's not out of state from like Twin Falls or Shelley.
I'm just
or
saying,
South.
right? Those
Or-
people are shady.
or Hollywood. All right, Corey, I really want to hear this community development director's report. I'm
What did
so excited.
I didn't put anything terrible in there, did I?
No, it's actually kind of cool. I was wondering what was going on with the Les Schwab building.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a year in the making, I hear, in the rumor mill.
Wait, what is going on?
He's gonna explain it.
Oh, this is next? Okay.
Yeah, so you have potential applications. I don't know if every one of them will be prepared.
Okay.
C on
But these are the applications that have come in that are underway to land on an agenda in the near future.
So when it says Miles Bell, Dave's Auto, we just did a thing for Dave's Auto.
You did. But they've secured the Les Schwab, and so that plan expired last December.
So they didn't implement the one we approved.
Correct.
Because I'd been paying attention and I never saw it, and so I was getting confused. Okay, so,
So now they're bringing in two different sites and,
Got it.
and doing some slight integration and modifications to the two site to function wholly for Dave's Complete Auto Repair. But, and so they've got to make some corrections, but you will potentially see them in the near future.
and the Centerville Industrial Flex, that's what we just talked about.
Correct, but now you're gonna see their preliminary subdivision. So this is where the subdivision's tracking just a little bit behind the site plan, so that the subdivision matches up with whatever site plan is approved.
And I'm not familiar with Pheasant Brook, just tell me where it
It's
is.
just by Pioneer Gardens.
Yeah, if you look at the older development by Pioneer, they have some open space. If you look over there,
Is it the one between Pioneer and the Colonial?
No, it's between Pioneer.
That's Garden View.
It's on Main Street, right?
Yep.
Yeah, west of Main Street.
Okay,
It's
okay,
been there
okay.
forever.
And
Fence,
they have
big
some
white
open
fence.
area as well as, I think they had some tennis courts and
Swimming pool.
some of it was RV parking, I think.
Chase Lane and Pioneer.
And they want to do some infill development to that project.
Okay,
So,
So they're just expanding it essentially.
Their tennis courts are taken
Similar
down
housing.
finally? They've been just acting as
maybe
a
they'll
weed
turn them
pit
into
for a long time.
pickleball.
No,
Yeah.
it's, if you ever drove down Main Street after the windstorm, it always said Ant Brook instead of Pheasant Brook. It's the big white fence
Yeah,
on the west side.
On the west
Where you
side,
get
closer,
Before
before
you
you
get
get
to
to
Smith
Chase.
Park.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before you hit the church.
Oh, and then tell me about what's Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A is struggling with their stacking
Drive-through,
Their
drive-through, and they're trying to resolve that.
big surprise.
Yeah, right.
Um,
In
But
and
the
out.
customers.
Every
to us-
Chick-fil-A I've seen has that problem.
But there is some constraint difficulties on that site, so I'm
Because
not.
they don't,
So they've made an official application,
We'll
and
see.
we've had two different engineering companies
Okay.
talk to us.
Ah.
And the one I haven't had the most conversations with ended up making the application. So
wonderful.
there's some constraints. I don't know whether that will continue forward, given some of my early thoughts,
Yeah.
but
They did launch a hot air balloon there the other day, which was totally
What?
awesome.
What?
And we walked over there and talked to him, and it was like my 6-year-old was jazzed. It was.
Sorry I missed it.
Are they gonna just acquire some property from the Hive and then we'll start that whole thing over again?
yeah, we're demoing the Hive, and then
Well, I noticed today the Hive is putting up a fence between the Hive and Chick-fil-A, which I
Is that that big
thought
building?
would come.
Right there?
It's the one to the north.
Oh,
Yeah,
the new
it's a
guys.
housing, new housing.
And I had thought that would come, but never did. And I thought, well, maybe they've worked out agreement with Chick-fil-A that they're gonna be their overflow parking. Anyway, okay, cool.
so
That'll be
that,
fun.
so we'll see where that comes into, and we do have a couple other applications that have been sitting on the back burner, but they're waiting for some things to come into fruition on the west side, and then I think we have another application for a small auto dealer that has not really responded back to their incomplete status, so
So there's the potential, the 14th could be a really full meeting.
it could be. I think you'll cut it in half. I think you'll see Centerville Flex.
Okay. Yeah.
Pheasant Brook, we're re-reviewing. They kind of sat for a long time unanswering the questions.
Okay.
So we're gonna be reviewing that to see if that's ready. I don't think the Bell's properties at
Ready.
Dave's Auto will be on there. And Chick-fil-A, I'm not sure.
TBD.
Could be there.
Cool.
So that's your agenda. You had the work session with the city council. They're moving forward with the idea of the general plan in common, and then we've got some of the ancillary things like the subdivision ordinance updates. I'm working on the moderate income housing, fulfilling the strategies to get those in place by August 1st. We did receive the market study for the West Centerville neighborhood area. A draft has come into the city. Staff has reviewed that draft. They're going back to finalize that report and submit it to the city. So that'll be interesting, some of the early conclusions that are coming out of that.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the west side, we have the applications I said that are sitting on the back burner. We have some commercial zone properties, and attracting commercial has been difficult. So they've wanted to amend some of the policies requiring that commercial. And there are already existing development approvals for those properties. And so the issue of trying to change those approvals is complex because it involves multiple properties, multiple owners under a master plan development. And they want to switch to some multifamily development is what they'd like to
Right
do.
over the freeway, and then right or left, or both?
Part of the megaplex is one of them, and then the trails behind with the Maverick. There's 2 pads on the roundabout. So they're waiting to decide how they would amend, and we've discussed that staff is more comfortable addressing the west side as a whole, rather than just, because we've been kind of just slowly Band-Aiding certain market patterns in that. We set a market pattern in one direction, some of it came to fruition, it was based on commercial, some of it's not coming to fruition, and we still have more areas that we want to take a look at. So the city's redevelopment agency did a market study for that side to try to see all those tensions between uses in the market, what's going on, and give a recommendation to us. And then we can decide where we want to go with a new alternative vision for that neighborhood. So that'll be a part of the general plan that the city council and plan commission talked about. So that's some interesting stuff going on in the background. There was something I thought of earlier today to talk with the commission about, and now all of a sudden it's escaped me. Oh, the city is also under the contract for branding. So this is the idea of not just a logo, but kind of, right now we're known by the friendliest city beside the Great Salt Lake. And that's been around for years, and that may be like the state flag. It doesn't get retired. It just ends up being historical. But there's a branding effort going on by the city council. Some surveys will be going out in July with the activities coming on, trying to find out what residents think of the city. And there was discussion in a meeting today yesterday, with the consultants that are doing the branding. We have Qualtrics and another company helping doing the brandings and getting the surveys out. And they thought of putting a little steering committee together with maybe a planning commissioner, a city council member, a couple of staff, and a resident or so to take a look at that branding effort. So if you're interested in a little subcommittee for branding, let me know and I'll send that up to Bryce.
Should we make them write an essay as why they should be chosen?
I don't think we're that sophisticated.
Yeah.
I think they want applicants.
Don't all of you want to be on
We're
the
all
committee?
dying.
So
I would say if there is all of you that want to be on it, you have to write the essay.
So why are
I'm
they,
concerned if you're gonna take off the friendly city and put like the unfriendly city, so
Yeah.
if that's the case, I want on the committee.
All right, we got Sean. I motion
No,
Sean.
choose me. I want unfriendly city because then no one else
No
will
one'll
come
come?
here.
yeah, so
We're
that
full.
was my question, why are they doing this? Are they trying to attract more people to live here? New businesses, why?
That is the million-dollar question. There have been a lot of tensions in the historic past about some recreation uses, how Centerville's seen in the marketplace. There's been a shift a little bit in the elected officials' thoughts about the city. And so they want to go out and check what the residents are thinking and then decide if, what should Centerville be in its, its icons. So, like questions we talk about. If there was a headline written about Centerville City as a city, what would it say?
Quiet and sleepy, stay away.
And that might be the motto. That might be the motto, quiet, sleepy, and stay away.
Where-
like we have another volunteer.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
not
I
change
got volunteered for a lot of things.
Not change
So
our
where's the
flag,
money
that's cool.
coming from?
It's budgeted, I think it was the RDA money. But I'm not sure. It might be general fund money. But I think it was the RDA
Yeah.
that funded it.
And it doesn't come, it's not taking from something else?
Wasn't taking what?
It's not taking it from something else?
No, they do their budget each year, what they want to spend some things on.
It's interesting.
And part of it is kind of a precursor to the general plan effort. When you take on a new general plan or a significant amendment to a general plan, you really sit back and say, what's happened since 1990? And what are we now trying to accomplish? And generally will always center around, there are things we like and that we want to preserve and keep and maintain, or whatever it comes out to. But you also have the economics of the city. We're 3 miles long, 2 miles wide. We're not growing in retail base, but yet demands of services are going up, costs of services are going up. So what do we need to do with, future growth, and what does it mean? Because there's not a lot of land left. How do you preserve your marketplace for your commercial? How do you create maybe some job capabilities in the city? And so I think this is all kind of a precursor to establishing a potential new vision of the city. How progressive that vision is the million-dollar question.
It seemed like the city council also, I could be wrong, but my impression was they wanted this done so that when Parish gets redeveloped with UDOT, they could say, hey, this is our interest to the city and this is what we want it to look and feel.
That's a very much a component of the redone of widening of I-15 and a new interchange, and what does it mean to Centerville?
Yeah,
Oh, just right there, not the whole Parish Lane.
a lot of Parish Lane.
Not of Parish
Yeah.
Lane.
Yeah.
Up to 400 West.
Yeah.
400 West
On-ramp,
to Legacy.
off-ramp, main
Oh,
road.
to just right there, okay.
So that's what's underway, and potentially some really cool planning stuff for the planning commission rather than site plan stuff for the planning commission.
That'll be cool.
I do have a question. When I was reading all of the general plan and everything today, it was, and this is a little bit off subject, but I did have a question about this.
Sure.
And it was talking about bike lanes, and it was talking about connecting East Centerville over to Legacy.
Yeah, there's multiple efforts in that.
Where is that?
There is a study done in 2022
Before my time.
or 2021. The cities, 5 cities participated in an alternative transportation mode study and got a grant for that. We have not evaluated that study and how we're putting it into the general plan. Much of what you see in the trails element and the maps from the Trails Committee encompasses a lot of those connections, but there are some additional connections. And part of that process is as we receive transportation funds, there's some enhancement funds and alternative transportation type funds that can be tagged on a UDOT project or something of that nature. So an example, what could be tagged on is 1250 West has a Maverick trailhead that takes you south,
Right.
but there's no trailhead taking you to the north or to the east. And so you can apply for those funds. And those need to be a part of your planning documents to get those types of funds to be approved. So there is some desire to connect it. I think you might also be reading UDOT's expansion where they're planning a pedestrian connection between Community Park and 1250 West at 1275, just at the end of by those white buildings on the west side, black and white buildings. There would be a trail, an overpass. Think of it like Utah Valley University going from university
Skywalk or
to
Skywalks
all the
or
way to the
something.
apartments. This would take you over to the industrial area. They're also redoing Parish Lane, and there's been a lot of discussion about how to integrate a better pedestrian path with the new interchange. And so there's been a lot of discussion to tie those together.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And call anytime you have a question,
Okay.
anytime.
Corey loves questions.
Yeah.
I send him an email almost every week with like
Nice.
12 questions. Might be exaggerating.
And I usually respond like, really? You want me to answer that?
Alrighty.
Straight to spam, right?
No, I
So,
don't.
auto
Something
reply.
else.
Corey is out of the office until the following date. All right, let's look at our minutes, see if we can get these approved. I've read over them. Let's start with page 1. Does anyone have any edits or changes they need to recommend? How about page 2? 3, 4. All right, I make a motion that we approve the minutes.
Second?
All right, we have a second. We can vote on this one together. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right, any last words before we adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All right, we have a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second?
Second, all in favor, let's vote together. Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you, everyone.